Everyone, and thanks for joining us for our semifinals prediction show. I'm your host, Lauren Khalil. If you like listening to us talk about CrossFit news and everything that's going on in the sport, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Before each semifinal, we're going to be playing a game with our sports analysts, Tommy Marquez, Brian Friend, and Patrick Clark, where they each pick who they think will punch their ticket to the CrossFit Games from each respective semifinal. The way that it's going to work, each analyst is going to pick their games ticket predictions for both the men and the women, with each a wild card athlete. Then throughout the month of semifinals, they will receive a point for every athlete that they get correct, and then an additional point if they correctly predict their placing. Today, we're going to tackle the Torian Pro. Right off the bat, the sports analysts, you guys were all on the same page. 1, 2, and 3 are all the same. Brian, let's just start with you. Why is this the order that you think we're going to see the Torian Pro?
Sure. Yeah. Well, Tia's going to be the favorite at any live event that she shows up to until someone's able to beat her. And so that's, pretty easy pick for number one. Cara has, pretty much been the number 2 female out of the Oceania region since Tia has emerged as the dominant force that she is in the sport. She looked very good there last year. Obviously, her games, was cut short due to illness, but everything is looking good for Cara this year. She's got a new programming with Mayhem. Her family and businesses seem to be going well, and I expect that she'll have a really good semifinal performance. And I think, probably the hardest pick was Ellie Turner, because a lot of people would have expected to, have Jamie Simmonds be almost a lock for the 3rd spot in this region. But Ellie's had a great offseason. She did look really good last year when she was much less well known, amongst fans of the sport. And I think that it's just one of those things we're not really sure how healthy Jamie is. She hasn't competed in a while, whereas we've seen Ellie, and so she's kind of fresh in our minds as someone who's definitely an up and coming force in the sport. So that's at least where my thought process was.
And speaking of Jamie Simmonds, Tommy, for you and Patrick, that was both your wild card prediction. What makes her that wild card? Do you think it's because of the injury that she's coming back from? I'll start with you, PC.
Yeah, definitely the injury obviously played a factor in her. She could easily be the 3rd place finisher at that event. Her and Ellie are interchangeable, but that injury is obviously an X factor. We don't know what type of Jamie Simmonds we're going to get because we haven't seen her compete. We've seen her compete in the Open and the quarterfinals, and she did extremely well, especially thought that she would do well in. But definitely the injuries that's basically what's holding her back in my selection in terms of her punching her ticket to Torian.
Tommy, what about you? What made you put her as the wild card? And was there maybe a second athlete that you were considering when picking that individual?
Well, for me, it's Jamie's body of work, right? So I think although she is coming back from injury, I think the further away that we get from that point where she had to go under the knife and get her shoulder repaired is just going to be time spent returning to the Jamie Simmonds that we were used to seeing. And I also think that you have to couple what the rehab process looks like. And then once the rehab process is done, rebuilding that shoulder back up to what we're used to. And overall, Torian has some pretty shoulder intensive programming. Obviously there's the heavy lift. There's a lot of handstand walking, there's strict handstand push-ups. There's heavy overhead squats, and some stuff that's going to be done under a very high intensity. And you have to have a couple in the overall impact that volume at a high intensity does, especially if you haven't competed in a while. So I'm not doubting Jamie Simmonds in any way, shape, or form. I just think there's still just time for her to recover from what was a pretty serious shoulder injury. And I think that I still expect to see her at the games, and I expect to see her do well at the games. So.
Okay, Brian, you had a different wild card pick. You had Madeline Sturt. Why did you pick her?
Yeah, I think that Maddie Sturt is, kind of the forgotten threat out there in Australia. She had made 4 straight CrossFit Games appearances. She had a couple finishes right around middle of the pack at the games. I think she was 19th and 21st in 2 consecutive years. And she's very, very young. She's still only like 23 or 4 years old and with a lot of experience. She also is, dating Jay Crouch and trains with him all the time. she's incredibly good. And it would be, it's one of the things that's kind of unfortunate about the fact that they only get 3 spots right now is that, there are going to be at least 2 women that don't make it through the initial qualifying stage that would be, right in the mix if they had the chance at the games. And that's not even to mention the 3 or 4 women that are choosing to compete on teams in Australia or New Zealand this year because they know that the potential to make it with such heavy hitters like Tia, Cara, Jamie, and Ellie is just slim to none.
And speaking of Jay, when we move on to the men's side, between Jay and Ricky Garrard, those were kind of 2 that each of you flip-flopped. Tommy, we'll start with you. Who do you think is the ultimate athlete from down under?
It sounds weird to say like ultimate athlete because I've kind of had Jay Crouch kind of tapped as the kind of heir apparent to be the consistent guy out of Australia. And he's been a steady qualifier the last couple of years, but for me, I just think that there's a lot on the line for Ricky. And it's not to say like motivation is an issue for any of these athletes at this point in time. I just think that there's so much on the line for Ricky to show up and do well here. And I've had the chance to talk with him in recent months. And it just feels like he's going to have just that little extra something to step out onto the floor and try and prove some people wrong, because he has mentioned that maybe the welcome back to the community that he's gotten from people on other continents hasn't necessarily been the same for the people within his own continent. And that's not to make any judgment calls on that, but I just think that maybe he might be firing on all cylinders and pushing a little bit harder, or have maybe a little bit more at stake personally to win outright in this format.
Lauren, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Brian. Brian's good at recognizing technical difficulties here. You, on the other hand, you have Jay up at the top of the leaderboard. Why him and not Ricky?
Yeah, I mean, it was almost a coin flip. And, even if you're just looking at their quarterfinals performances, they finished within 1 point of each other. And Jay Crouch took second at Torian Pro last year by 1 point to Royce Dunn. And, like Tommy said, this is a guy who most people have been aware of for a couple of years. He seems to be having everything go in the right direction. As far as I know, he hasn't had any real setbacks due to injury or interruptions in his training, and just a very consistent training environment. He's learning from, what I still consider to be the best that's ever done it out of that part of the world, in Rob Forte, who I think is pretty involved in coaching him this season. And, Ricky's a guy that we've been talking about all offseason. And so he's kind of in the same boat as Ellie Turner. And like, he's the guy, she's the girl that we know about who's making all the right moves. Whereas Jay's been a little bit more quiet and a little bit more reserved in the offseason. But I kind of like that. I'm always, it reminds me of like BKG. Like he's not big flash. He's not showing out on all the Instagrams and everything like that, but he's just getting work done, putting together solid training cycles. So I'm going to give the slight edge to Jay here, but it's kind of, picking hairs.
PC, when we look at your selection, also similar to Brian and Tommy's, but your wild card pick was different. I'm not actually familiar with Matt McLeod.
Matt McLeod.
McLeod. Okay, now that name sounds familiar. See, I have you guys to help me with him. Tell me a little bit about him. Why do you have him as the wild card, PC?
Yeah, Matt McLeod, he was kind of burst on the scene in 2019, had a top 10 fin. Kind of disappeared the last couple of years, nationals, and then last year we didn't see too much from him. And this year, and kind of popped back up in the Open, did really well in the quarterfinals. He's got that experience. I know that's something that typically someone like Brian, he puts a lot of value on when it comes to experience, and that's kind of what I looked at with Matt McLeod. Is like, here's a guy who has that experience. He's been there before, and why not? Why not someone like Matt McLeod?
The first one, guys, the Torian Pro, it's going to launch actually as the first semifinal, as they are about a day ahead of us. It's going to be super exciting, and we're going to continue playing this game for all of the semifinals throughout the season. It should be a good time. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.